Welcome everyone to my presentation on the neural and computational basis of semantic cognition. I will be presenting the first part of this review article by Ralph, Jefferies, Patterson, and Rogers. Before we dive into more details, I would like to make clear what the authors mean when they're talking about semantic cognition. Semantic cognition refers to the collection of neurocognitive mechanisms that allows us to use, manipulate, and generalize knowledge that we learn throughout our life. When we then use this knowledge to support all types of verbal and nonverbal behaviors. These behaviors can be as simple as spreading jam on bread, but it does require a person to recognize what certain objects are and what actions should be taken. The main goal of this article is to describe their foundations for a framework that is called Controlled Semantic Cognition, or CSC. This is based on previous research on semantic cognition from both a neurological and computational perspective. According to the CSC framework, semantic cognition relies on two neural systems that interact with each other. There's the system of representation and the system of control. The system of semantic representation allows us to form concepts through previous experiences, and it promotes the generalization of knowledge. The system of semantic control in turn manipulates the activity within this network of semantic representation. During this presentation, I'll be talking about the system of semantic representation, and Andrew will explain the system of control in the next presentation. About a decade ago, the authors already proposed a theory which was called the hub-and-spoke theory of semantic representation. This explains how the statistical nature of our multimodal experience leads to forming conceptual knowledge. The theory assumes that multimodal experiences are encoded in modality-specific cortices, which are also being referred to as spokes. And these are located throughout the brain. It also assumes that interactions between these spokes are mediated by a single hub that is modality invariant. This hub is located on both sides of the anterior temporal lobe, the ATL, and it is trained to connect information about concepts in one modality with the information about the concept in another modality. This then creates a general representation of different concepts. In this figure, we can see the hub and spoke model that is presented from both a computational and neuroanatomical perspective. In both figures, the ATL hubs are presented in purple, and you can see how it is connected to all modality-specific cortices as a mediator. Proof for the ATL hub is based on different empirical and computational observations, but the study of semantic dementia is maybe the most striking one. Semantic dementia is a progressive disease that damages the ATL and leads to a degradation in semantic knowledge. People with semantic dementia show impairments across all modalities and conceptual domains. How well these patients perform on semantic knowledge tasks is very consistent, and it can be predicted by taking into account only three factors: the familiarity of the item, the typicality of the item, and the specificity of the required knowledge. The link between semantic impairment and the ATL is a relatively new discovery, which became known with the introduction of modern neuroimaging techniques. Previous research was mostly based on patients with damage to different brain regions, and there was also a bias in fMRI studies due to methodological issues. However, since the relation between semantic impairment and the ATL hub was established, it has been studied extensively. As I told you earlier, the ATL hub processes any type of concept. However, recent studies suggest that the ventrolateral ATL hub seems to be more active for specific concepts compared to more basic concepts. Different neuroimaging studies with both healthy participants, neurosurgical patients, and patients with semantic dementia showed that the ventrolateral ATL, the VATL, is the cross-modal center point of the ATL hub for multimodal naming and comprehension. The activity in the VATL hub has also been measured over time in response to different types of stimuli and tasks. So in this graph, the red line and the blue line represent the temporal response to detailed semantical information. And they found that the VATL is activated 250 milliseconds after the stimulus is presented. This was not found for domain level distinctions, which lead to an earlier response at around 120 milliseconds after the stimulus was presented. So these results were based on representational similarity analysis of electrocorticography data. So shortly, ECOG is an invasive technique where the skull of a neurosurgical patient is opened up and electrodes are placed directly onto the brain. And similar results have been found using transcranial magnetic stimulation, so TMS. In this graph, you can see that there is activation after 250 milliseconds, only for the detailed semantic information. This is represented by the purple line. So the original hub and spoke model that we've been talking about so far did not include anything about the subregions of the ATL. However, there has been new evidence that indicates that the function varies in a graded manner across the ATL subregions. And this evidence is based on 3 different clues. So the first clue is that the graded function variation comes from cytoarchitecture. This is the cellular composition of the brain tissue. And this was already noticed earlier by famous neurologist Corbinian Brodmann, because he already noted that transitions between the temporal and parietal regions were graded and not defined by sharp borders. This observation was later replicated across the ATL region. So the second clue is based on structural and functional connectivity. The white matter muscle fibers from different parts of the brain converge in different areas of the ATL. For example, the superior ATL is most strongly connected to the primary auditory and premotor regions, while the superior temporal sulcus, STS, and the superior temporal gyrus, the STG, are most strongly connected to the language systems. This leads to graded differentiation in partially overlapping connectivity across the ATL. This has also been observed in fMRI studies. So the last clue comes from recent neuroimaging studies, which show results that are consistent with a model where the ATL is graded in its function. And I will give you an example of this. So one of these studies showed that the further away we move from the center point of the ATL, the more the ATL function is tied to a specific modality, but this happens in a gradual manner. Accordingly, the medial ATL responds the most to concrete or visual concepts, while the STS and the STG are very responsive to abstract concepts and verbal semantic processing. You can also see these findings in the image below. So the conclusion that we can take from these clues is that the ATL seems to show graded functional specialization instead of having discrete regions for different functions. So the authors refer to this view as the graded hub hypothesis. So this is already the end of my part of the presentation, and Andrew will continue on this paper in the next video. But before you click the video away, I will briefly present you the discussion questions that I have, so you already have some time to think about it before class on Wednesday. So my discussion questions for tomorrow are: how do new neuroimaging techniques contribute to studies in the field of neurolinguistics? The second question is the modification of the hub and spoke model to the graded hub and spoke model surprising to you? And the last question is, can you think of anything related to the hub and spoke model that could still be investigated? So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I will see you guys tomorrow.